Hello, Professor and class. My name is James Davis, and this is a discussion on the dissertation research in which I will be focusing on the era surrounding the War of 1812. Various approaches have been employed to discern the events that occurred during that era and the events leading up to it, with the specific era I intend to explore being the Canadian theater during the year 1813. In existence are many approaches to explaining the cause of the stand-up militia. Historians have viewed this period through the lens of a war-hawk government enthusiastically promoting the liberation of the Canadians from the oppressive British, while other historians have depicted the history of this era as a war over the impressment of sailors. Both lenses, however, fail to describe the history of the militiamen and their reasons for voluntarily joining such a war effort. The body of knowledge surrounding the War of 1812 is quite extensive and includes a wide variety of dissertations and theses. Among the body of knowledge available in ProQuest are Christopher Smith's dissertation entitled American Rebels, Soldiers' Protest in the Early American Military, 1754 to 1815, as well as Eugene Watkins' dissertation entitled Cousin Jonathan, the Common United States Soldier in the War of 1812. In a review of Christopher Smith's dissertation, American Rebels, he explores the history of mutiny, desertion, and other indiscipline exhibited by soldiers during the early period of America. In exploring this history, he highlights the thread of conflict between early America and the Indian population. His methodology in researching these is to look at various parts of the early American history in chronological order while noting the constant entanglements. His findings conclude with a strange case of disciplinary problems surrounding Lieutenant Colonel Louis Bach that occurred in the fall of 1814, which Smith uses to address the complexities encapsulated during these conflicts and the resulting disciplinary measures that happened afterward. He ultimately concludes that the soldiers who protested had little results in their period, but contributed to a larger body of Americanism in the ranks that crafted a unique military establishment where volunteers expected fair treatment and fair compensation for rendering their services. In Eugene Watkins' dissertation entitled Cousin Jonathan, he looks at the makeup of the military as opposed to the battles waged. He focuses on the volunteer and drafted militia as a metric for his methodology in a sort of bottom-up approach, as well as the terms of enlistment that were employed. Additionally, he analyzes the Native American volunteers who served alongside the Americans. His research highlights lesser-known views that referred to the conflict as an Indian War, highlighting the undertone of animosity between the Indians and the Americans. In summarizing his views, he notes the dwindling recruitment efforts of volunteers due to pay, supply shortages, and poor medical care experienced by the initial enlistees. Lastly, Watkins goes on to label the War of 1812 as the death knell of the state militia system and the beginning of a federal volunteer military. Lastly is Garret Clift's 1961 book, Remember the Raisin, in which he describes the Battle of Frenchtown and the Kentuckians who were slaughtered. Clift's approach is a straightforward history of the events, taking into account the several accounts that were left by veterans of the conflict. Clift describes a Colonel William Harrison and his militia who had set out to take possession of lands and exact justice against the Indian marauders who had murdered a white man. This led to them to Frenchtown, where they repelled a group of British soldiers but were later massacred by Indians after a bitter defeat with the British regulars. In closing, the topic of volunteer militia speak to a greater volume of the thoughts of Americans during that time and is worthy of investigation. While the focus of the 1812 is generally focused on interactions of a large-scale conflict, the motives of the soldiers enlisting are immeasurably important as it points to the hardships of the everyday soldier and the problems they faced. These motives, which do seem slanted toward the fear of an enemy Indian population, led to victories which galvanized the nation and solidified its existence.